Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily. Today is Tuesday, May 7th, 2024. On today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about the latest film and TV news. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm an editor at slashfilm.com, and I'm joined on today's episode by Slash Film staff writer and box office analyst Ryan Scott.
Hey everyone, how's it going?
All right, Ryan, you've still got that construction going on at your place, so I apologize to the listeners if any of that audio sort of bleeds through into our conversation here, but we're making do as best we can. We're trying to adapt. So,
Yeah, also if there's some weird crinkling, I have an ice pack on my shoulder for this episode as well, so I apologize about that.
Yeah, man, you're fending off injuries, you're dealing with noise. This is the whole thing. So let's put our heads down and get through this the best we can. Speaking of putting their heads down, the folks at Universal, I'm guessing, probably have their heads in their hands right now, based on how the Fall Guy performed in theaters in its opening weekend. Tell me about that, Ryan.
Yeah, so look, we talked about this in the summer preview episode. I just wasn't sure, and I think at that time we were talking about a possible $40 million opening, which would have been fine, but it still would have required this movie to leg out, given its reported $130 million budget, I believe, is what it landed on after all tax incentives and stuff. And well, it was a lot worse than that. Unfortunately, weekend estimates had it at 28.5 million, but as I just pointed out in our Slack right before the episode, it actually was only 27.7 million. So it was almost $1 million even lower than what even the weekend estimates were. So it was pretty rough. Yeah, and then it made 36.7 internationally, so it's at $64.4 million globally right now. This is a little less than David Leitch's previous movie Bullet Train, which it wasn't nearly as expensive. I mean, it was 90 million, so it's still expensive, but not quite as expensive. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said, obviously, but yeah, I mean, look, 27, just shy of 28 million against a $130 million budget just isn't what you want to do.
Man, this is so depressing to me, Ryan, because I loved The Fall Guy, and we talked about it in the podcast. We ran the interviews that you did with the cast on Friday's episode. I mean, it's just such a fun movie. It's just is like exactly what I want Hollywood to be doing, and now clearly Hollywood is not going to be doing more of this because the numbers just don't seem to add up here. And it like crushes my soul to see this movie perform so poorly. And like, I just don't understand because it has everything that I want in a movie. And it just makes me feel completely disconnected with wider audiences. And like, it just is one of those things that kind of like has me reeling. So I don't know how you feel about it, like personally, or like how you feel about it in terms of what lessons the studios might learn or sort of what impact this might have on the
Look
industry
up the
at all.
definition of the word despondent. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
This is so just for some further context, I had to do some digging, and I was not the only box office analyst out there doing this, but from my calculations, this is the worst um a start to the summer box office since 2003 when the Lizzie McGuire movie opened. And that opened to $17.3 million. However, if you want this to get a little more depressing, if you adjust that for inflation, that gets up to $29.3 million. So even the Lizzie McGuire movie essentially had like a similar opening to The Fall Guy. But then right around the corner that summer was The Matrix Reloaded, which ended up doing, gigantic numbers. So we don't really have that coming right around the corner. We don't have a guaranteed $100 million opener till July.
Yeah.
So I mean, look, I can start going over how depressing this is on some level. The only optimism I have is that this has an A- cinema score, and reviews are good, so the people that are seeing it are really liking it. So like Elemental last year opened at 29.6 million and eventually got to almost 500 million worldwide, largely thanks to incredible word of mouth and very strong overseas numbers.
Mhm.
So there is an outside shot that this is not over yet. The difference with animation, though, is that there's less direct competition in that space. So, that makes things tricky. But I don't want to make the mistake like I did last year with Elemental of completely writing a movie off because I felt, thankfully silly in hindsight on that one.
Mhm.
However, the numbers tell us this is not great. I think for me, where I'm getting stuck, like you're saying, Hollywood might not make more of these. Maybe they will, because let's talk about this for a second. What's working right now? We've not had a single horror movie truly break out in a meaningful way this year yet. We have not. Superhero movies continue to be very iffy at best. You're gonna have your breakouts, but it's not like it was. Um, you can't make Godzilla movies forever. You're only gonna get a Star Wars movie every couple of years. Not everything can be an animated family friendly movie. So what works, Ben? You tell me what works. What do you
I
do
mean,
if you're a
I
Hollywood studio right now?
I have no idea, and like I feel
Right.
like that's a huge problem
It's a
because like
gigantic problem. It's the problem I didn't even realize I was trying to address until this weekend, where I'm like, what works? What reliably works right now? And the answer is, I don't know.
yeah, because like last year we saw, the IP plays that studios have been leaning on for what feels like decades at this point, but really is probably, I mean, I guess technically studios have been leaning on IP for a long time. Like sequels have been a thing forever and ever and ever.
Forever. People want to act like it's a recent thing. It's just, it got worse in the last 20 years, but it wasn't always that. It was always a thing.
The dial has definitely been turned up significantly in the past 20 years. So like that seems to, and I don't know if, I mean, it's probably a combination of a lot of factors, including the pandemic and people being trained to watch things at home and the streaming revolution and all these things that we've been talking about on the show for the past, whatever, 5 years or something. But it's just like, it's kind of scary, man. Like, I don't know if horror and you mentioned there has not been a big horror breakout this year. And that's been something we've reliably been able to sort of count on over the past few years. And it has nothing to do with quality because I saw The First Omen and Immaculate, and there are probably other horror movies that I'm not even remembering off the top of my head. Night Swim. These are like good movies. I mean, I actually like First Omen and Immaculate a lot more than Night Swim, but like these are good movies. It's not
Yeah.
like the movies are bad and
And
so people aren't turning out.
Night Swim did fine. And I think Immaculate will do fine for Neon in the end. But a $20 million horror movie isn't going to move the needle. And like to that end, another piece I wrote for us, Sony dropped Tarot in theaters this weekend. It felt like it was hardly advertised, but what I came to find out was Tarot did a purely online marketing campaign. They didn't even do billboards. No TV spots, nothing. So Sony saved a fortune probably by going that way about it. And it was only an $8 million movie. So it made 6.5, which like at a first glance looks like borderline disastrous. But truth be told, because of the minimal marketing spend and the cheap movie, it's probably going to make Sony some money in the end. But that doesn't move the needle for theaters enough to matter. And that's
Yeah.
the thing. Like, we haven't had a Black Phone yet this year, or we haven't had an Evil Dead Rise this year. We've had some horror movies do okay relative to their budget, but, so that's what's good about horror. But, the problem is, like, when, Star Wars The Phantom Menace can debut at number 2 in re-release with $8.7 million on the first weekend of summer, that's not good.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting conversation to be had. And I think, thank God that movie did as well as it did. And thank God that Challengers only dropped, 49% and, made 7.5 million on its second weekend. But, I'm with you, man. I felt some optimism at certain points this year, but this weekend really made me realize, like, I don't know where, like, if you're a Hollywood studio now, what do you greenlight? Like, what do you look at and go, because The Fall Guy, 87% on Rotten Tomatoes, A- cinema score, Ryan Gosling, Emily Blunt coming off the biggest movies of their career, David Leitch, one of the most like reliable hit-making franchise directors we have going right now. They did everything right.
Yeah.
And it just didn't, I'm not saying for sure it's not going to work out in the end, but it's not looking good. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's rough sledding, and it definitely does not inspire confidence.
Yeah, man. It's I don't even have like a good wrap it up type of quip as we move on to the next thing.
I
just
don't
really
either.
find
I don't. I just understand that, like, as the summer, this first month of summer goes on, month or two, there's probably going to be a little more pessimism to go around. I hate to say.
Yeah. Okay. So one person who's not focusing on pessimism is James Gunn, who is directing this new Superman movie that is supposed to be all about optimism, Ryan. And David Corenswet is playing this character. And yesterday, James Gunn released the first official, like full body image of Superman. And I'm curious what you made of this, because the internet had a whole thing. I mean, everybody's sort of reacted in their own way to this. But what was your take on this new look at what our new Superman looks like?
So look, I've said it before. I'm not the biggest DC guy, and I'm very specifically not really like a Superman guy. Superman often bored me to tears, but I said this, and again, it might have a lot to do with it's been over a decade, but I remember when I first saw Henry Cavill in the Superman costume, And I just remember being like, damn, that's Superman. And like, I didn't have that feeling when I saw that. I just felt nothing. And like, I
Mm.
love James Gunn as a filmmaker. I have every belief. Let me be very clear. I have every belief this movie's going to be good. But I just, the image did nothing for me, like nothing. I had the same thing that some people had where I thought it was odd that like, if you look at the top of the image where like he's leaning over and like parts of the suit are like crumpled, crinkled up. And
Hmm.
like, you're so used to seeing these superhero suits like form fit, so it's like a little odd to see, but it also does make it feel like real in some way.
Yeah, like lived
Um,
in a little bit.
yeah, so I don't know. I mean, there's a lot to be said, but yeah, I didn't have very strong feelings, and I don't know if that's a problem, but that was sort of where I landed on it.
Yeah, I mean, you said there's a lot to be said. I really don't have a lot to say about this image, and I thought I was going to because I've been a big Superman fan for really my whole life. Well, I don't know. There are much bigger Superman fans out there than I am. But I like grew up, loving the Christopher Reeve movies, and then I watched Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman with
Did
Terry
you
Hatcher
really?
and Dean
Oh
Cain.
wow.
Yeah, when that was on. And caught that in reruns a bunch of times. I watched Smallville all the way through, and so I've liked Superman as a character for a long time. Obviously, the Snyder movies have kind of put me off of the character a little bit because that's been all we've had, really. I know there's been like some animated series and stuff like that that I've not really dipped into.
And Superman
Um,
and Lois on the CW, which
yeah,
is
and
about to wrap up.
yeah, CW stuff I did not tap into for that most recent show either. But anyway, point being, like I have a history for this character and liking this character and all that, and I kind of felt the same as you. I was just like, huh, okay, well, like that's an image, all right. Like that's a guy in
Yeah,
a Superman suit.
but
So
I also think that could speak to the idea of sort of what we're talking about with like superhero movies no longer being this reliable thing that they once were. And I think like, 11 years ago, Jeremy Mathai pointed this out in our Slack, slash film writer Jeremy Mathai, that, yeah, that was like in 2011 when Zack Snyder revealed the first look at Henry Cavill in costume. And like, that's a long time ago,
yeah.
and so, we were all feeling very differently. That was only a few years after Iron Man came out. That was only a few years
Hmm.
after The Dark Knight came out. It's very worlds away from where we're at now. So we're all
Yeah.
kind of used to this stuff. We've had several Supermen since then, and so yeah, I don't know but I can't emphasize that at the end of the day, I just remember when they announced Guardians of the Galaxy, and I was like, what are they doing? Why am I not getting a Doctor Strange movie? What is this shit with a talking tree? And then Guardians of the Galaxy remains one of my favorite superhero movies of all time. So
Hmm.
like, that first Suicide Squad movie was terrible. The Suicide Squad is awesome. So I think like I have so much faith in James Gunn. Like, and the one interesting thing is he did point out that there's that sky beam sort of behind Clark in the photo.
Hmm.
Apparently that was all captured in camera. That's not CG. So I don't
Well,
know what.
I think you can still say it's CG, but like I would imagine it would still be like an LED wall or something behind them, with CG elements added to it or whatever. But like
Oh,
the
sure,
physical
but
image itself
But
is
yeah,
all
but
in
the idea
camera.
that that was captured, like that's not some post production thing, is kind of
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Like so that's interesting. Like because the idea, I think we all got a little exhausted with some of the like over CG stuff and So I don't know, and like a lot of people pointed out the image. It's like there were a lot of jokes, like like there's clearly like Metropolis is in peril and Clark's just sort of slowly putting on his boots.
Yeah.
It's like is that going to be part of the take? Like, is it like because this is a world where superheroes already exist. Like, is he already a little like, all right, Superman's my job? Like, I don't know if that's what it is, but that would be like an interesting way to approach it, perhaps. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's from everything James Gunn has been saying, it seems like he'll be a little bit more like optimistic, get up and go than that. But we'll have to wait and see. I'm just so curious, especially after something like The Fall Guy just does not really work in its opening weekend, and we've seen these other projects that Hollywood has been releasing not really work to the level that the industry really needs them to. Um, are people going to really show up for a Superman movie in 2025? Like, does it have the same cultural cachet that it once did? Is it a reliable thing in the same way that it has been in years prior? So I just like so curious to see
Well,
how that goes.
I think the thing we're seeing is that good superhero movies, and look, I'm not here to, when I say good, I mean if you were to poll 1,000 people
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
get like I think good superhero movies are still breaking through in some way. And I also think even look at something like Black Adam that made almost $400 million worldwide. If you can get those budgets down, there's still an audience there. So I think and I know it's hard for a movie like that, but it's not impossible. So I think that that's something I would look at. Like there's talk of making a Swamp Thing movie or some of this stuff. You can't make that for 200 million, but
Yeah.
there's maybe an audience for that. So I think like depending, as long as they don't overspend on Superman, I think this relaunch of the DCU, the excitement around James Gunn, some of this stuff, if you get a good trailer, it can totally, I could see it get to like 500 worldwide or something, but you've got, it's got to under the right circumstances. So I'm curious. We'll see. I mean, it makes it feel real. We've talked about this for a long time. It's, the first new solo Superman movie in over a decade. So that's not nothing.
So speaking of superheroes, Bob Iger over at Disney has mentioned basically in a new interview or a new a presentation of some sort, he was talking about his plans for Marvel. And he's sort of alluded to this in the past, but now he's sort of put a finer point on it. And he basically says that the new mission at Marvel is to drop the number of Marvel TV shows to 2 a year and the film output to no more than 3 movies a year. His quote is, "We're slowly going to decrease volume and go to probably about 2 TV series a year instead of what had become 4, and reduce our film output from maybe 4 a year to 2 or a maximum of 3. We're working hard on what that path is." This was on an earnings call. He also says, "We have a couple of good films in 2025, and then we're headed to more Avengers, which we're extremely excited about. Overall, I feel great about the slate. It's something that I've committed to spending more and more time on. The team is one that I have tremendous confidence in, and the IP that we're mining, including all the sequels that we're doing, is second to none." So a lot of that is just sort of like typical CEO talk. But yeah, I mean, a couple of good films in 2025 and then on to more Avengers does not necessarily... I don't know. I mean, I guess the only Disney Marvel movie that's coming out this year is Deadpool and Wolverine. The fact that he didn't really mention that seems interesting. But I don't know. What do you make of this sort of like putting a number on what we've sort of suspected has been coming for a little while, Ryan?
Yeah, but that's the thing. We've known this is coming. I think the TV shows is the big thing, right? Like you're like, look, 2, maybe 3. That's it. And I think that, look, I know that there are pessimistic ways to look at this stuff, but like at least a studio like Disney is taking the lesson, right? Like, okay, we got to start taking what the audience will give us and hopefully we can win them back because they just oversaturated people and they know they did.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope they learn that I hope they take that into account with Star Wars as well. But yeah, like I think that it's smart. Like, I don't know. I mean, because right now I'm looking at the calendar. You've got Captain America, Thunderbolts, Fantastic Four, and Blade all on the calendar next year. So there's no way Blade sticks.
Mm-hmm.
So one of those gets bumped, and I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I think it's smart. Like you can't. And again, 2 maximum of 3 because we got used to like 3 a year was the thing for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think some people were like, well, 3 is what they were doing. I'm like, well, he's saying maximum of 3. Like, so I think that like you don't dare go over that, and so, and I also think the bigger thing is in between that, you're not going to have 4 shows to keep up with. And I bet you any shows that are in development now are like, this is in addition to, and you better not have to watch this, and I'm betting that they're making that, more of a thing. So look, we'll see. But I think that like, at least they're trying to sort of take the lesson of, okay, we overdid it, understood, like and not just trying to figure out how they can somehow cram more in. So I
Yeah,
appreciate that at least.
I do too. And he mentioned something about like the previous I guess administrations, which technically was under him too. I mean, like when Disney Plus came out, it was people forget that like people like to throw Bob Chapek under the bus for ramping this stuff up, but Iger, started turning the dial up himself before he left, and then obviously he returned as Disney CEO. But his quote was like, the company is moving away from quote a vestige, basically a desire in the past to increase volume, and I think he referred to like some of the TV shows that are still sitting there as that. And so that makes me wonder if like Ironheart, which has been maybe finished. I don't know, like sitting there for a
It's
long
been
time.
done. It finished filming, I think, in November 2022.
Yeah. So like, when are we going to see that? Are they going to like, because now that they're only going to put out a couple shows a year, are they going to like go back in and like make that the best they can? Are they like pot committed to the point where they have to release that and they have to like spend so much more to get, because you're at that point, you're in such a danger zone if you're Disney and Marvel right now of like, okay, yeah, we're going to slow things down. But if we slow things down and release bad stuff or things that, we're not as confident in now as we were in that sort of go, go, go period. Um, Now that everyone has shown like, hey, we really need this stuff to be great, to get people to care. Can they weather the storm of releasing a handful of things, whether it be, Ironheart or like the Agatha show or something that, if that stuff is not like top tier material, will people just turn off even further? And then will it be even more difficult to get people to come back to the stuff that eventually ends up being good? And to be clear, I have no idea about the quality of those shows. I'm just presenting like a what if scenario here. So I don't know, just a lot to think about when it comes to this stuff. But
Yeah,
uh,
for sure.
yeah, I wanted to mention before we take a break, a couple of stories real quick. The new Exorcist movie has lined up one of the best horror directors working right now. I wonder if you can tell me about that.
Yeah, so and look, I don't want to overstate the point yet because usually once you hear someone is in talks, it's pretty much a done deal. But Mike Flanagan of The Haunting of Hill House, Doctor Sleep, I know I'm forgetting stuff right now, but one of the most respected names in horror right now is supposedly going to direct this next Exorcist movie. Now, if you recall, last year's The Exorcist Believer was supposed to kick off a new trilogy that Universal is obligated to make because of the deal they made with Morgan Creek. They spent a fortune to get the rights to this thing, and they now so Exorcist Believer did fine ish on its own as a movie. If you look at like that, the budget for it was 30 million. It made like 130 worldwide, but the problem is Universal made like a $400 million deal for this whole trilogy. So they're moving away from David Gordon Green, who directed the last one, and supposedly Flanagan's coming in to do this next one.
I mean, that's got to be good news for horror fans, right?
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by it because Flanagan is one of those guys horror wise could probably do like for a while I've hoped if not suspected because that Wes Craven's estate for a while was talking about trying to get a new Nightmare on Elm Street movie done. They were talking about taking pitches and I thought he was one of the few guys that could maybe go in there and get that going like immediately. Um and he's talked about doing he's doing a Dark Tower thing supposedly, like he's got other stuff and irons in the fire. My thing here is, and I'm not the only person to point this out, is I get why this Exorcist movie needs Mike Flanagan. Why the hell does Mike Flanagan need to do this? Like what does he get out of this other than a paycheck, of course? Like is it even worth him taking this on? Like you're walking into a mess. So I don't know, like that part of it intrigues me, but the idea of like if you just said blindly divorced of everything else, Mike Flanagan is making an Exorcist movie, I'm very interested, of course. But yeah, I think that him walking into the situation as it exists, hard for me to understand how this happened.
I wonder if the original plan, and this is pure speculation on my part, and maybe you know a little bit more about this, maybe you've read a little bit more if they've released any of this information. I wonder if the original plan might have been for a trilogy to be thematically connected or narratively linked or whatever, and then maybe now that the first movie did okay, like you said, but didn't really light the box office on fire. Maybe they're bringing Flanagan in to just do something totally different. And like they are going to release 3 of these movies, but it's going to have more of like an anthology feel or
I
something.
think there's no question that that's what they're going to do because they weren't necessarily obligated. My understanding is they weren't obligated to tell a specific story in that trilogy. They
Mhm.
were just so they might bring a character back or whatever. Because the other problem is that Exorcist Believer not well received at all. So
Yeah.
like then your bigger problem there is how do you get people interested in a sequel to a movie they might not have liked. So yeah, you've got to. So again, that's why I understand why Universal goes to Flanagan and goes, please. Um, but like,
Yeah.
why does he say yes? And that's what's got me curious.
Yeah,
Um,
I hope the answer is because he has like a really personal connection to this franchise and like a story that he feels like is perfect for this universe or something like
I
that.
don't think he's made a bad movie. Like I don't, you know what I mean? Like if you look at it, and I mean, especially I never watched Bly Manor, but I watched Haunting of Hill House, boy, do I love Midnight Mass. Like that is some stellar stuff right there. Like I'm not even a big vampire guy, but if you haven't watched Midnight Mass, my God. So yeah, I mean, like again, I go back and forth on this where I just like, did he just have a good idea? Did he go to them? Like
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. So this intrigue, but again, he's not signed on the dotted line yet. So we'll see. But
Okay.
yeah.
All right, so back in February, Ryan, we talked about Travis Knight potentially taking over as the director of the long in the works live action Masters of the Universe film. And at the time, that project was still looking for a home, and now it has found one. Amazon MGM has saved it from oblivion and will put this movie out in theaters on June 5th, 2026. And Travis Knight is still on board to direct, and Chris Butler, who has worked on some Leica stop motion animated movies like Paranorman and Kubo and the Two Strings and Missing Link, is now set to write the script. So, thoughts on Amazon/MGM being the home for this project?
For me, the bigger thing is the 2026 theatrical release. Like not even just that it's happening, that it's like they're committed to putting it in theaters. I'm of a couple of minds about this, given everything we talked about, like box office wise. Like this feels like old IP chasing to me.
Yep.
Like slightly outdated thinking of like IP is good because people like things. Um, I don't know. Amazon is one of the only companies I could see sort of, because as we've talked about, like even a $200 million budget is a rounding error for that company.
Yep.
But I also don't want them to overinvest in these things and have someone go, "Wait, what are we doing?" Like and pull the plug. So I don't know. I still struggle because I was never tapped into like the Masters of the Universe stuff that much. Like I still struggle to understand how this is like a franchise worthy of, because it's there's no way to make a Masters of the Universe movie that isn't wildly expensive. Like it's just the sets, the CGI, it's gonna be really expensive. Um so I don't know. I struggle to see where there's like a big enough franchise there, but I mean, the amount of money that's already been sunk into this specific version of this movie, that for nothing to have happened,
Yeah.
something's got to happen eventually, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm so curious about that because the project has been in the works since 2007, and reportedly anywhere from 30 to 60 million dollars has already been spent on development. And it's unclear to me whether Mattel spent that money or Netflix, which was working on it for a
Well,
while,
it's
or
probably a
whether,
co-production deal, so it's I'm sure.
but like Netflix is out now, and so Amazon MGM has it. So like, is Mattel the one that's shouldering all of that budget and sort of incorporating it into the budget of this eventual movie? I don't know.
Well,
I'm
what I
curious.
think probably happened, I'm not positive about this, but I think Mattel has eaten what they've eaten cost wise. But I think like so when you sign with a production partner, there's deals like what like Legendary has like an 80/20 deal with Warner Brothers for the Doom movies, I think is what it is. So like
Mhm.
Legendary shouldering 80. So whatever that deal is, like Netflix is going, we want your IP. Hasbro's agreeing to do whatever their percentage is. So they've eaten their percentage, and when it changes hands, my understanding is like, well, you are letting the project go. So Netflix said we invested what we invested. It's not worth it to us. They essentially are eating their end of the cost.
Okay.
So that's what my understanding of how that works.
Okay. All right, let's take a break. We have more news to talk about right after this. All right, so this is a big topic, Ryan, and we don't really have a ton of time left on the show today, so I guess let's try to breeze through this as quickly as possible. But last week, you wrote an article called "A Rival Hollywood Studio Just Offered to Buy Paramount in a Major Shakeup." Since then,
Yeah, I can
some
make this
more.
short. Yeah.
Okay, some more
Yeah.
information has come out. So give me like sort of like the up to the minute what we know right now of this story.
All right, I'm gonna go through this as quickly as possible. But mostly, this opens up another topic entirely, but this is why this can be short. So Paramount has kind of been up for sale. It's no secret they designated a special board to field offers a little while ago, essentially because like Paramount is having a tough time competing in the marketplace as it is, and blah blah blah. So there's been a few offers on the table. Skydance, the company behind like Mission Impossible and the more recent Terminator movies, had a unique deal. I don't understand the full deal, but like there was an odd financing deal, and it wasn't super popular with shareholders because they wouldn't make out super well. But Sherry Redstone, whose parent company owns Paramount, was like in favor of that deal. That looks like it's not going to happen. So then what happened is that exclusive window for Skydance negotiations was closing. Sony came in with this private equity firm to offer like 26 billion all cash to buy Paramount, which was a lot more than the Skydance deal. But the rub there was that they were going to take the company private. So Paramount is currently a public company, and they were going to try to take it private. That would take the number of studios in Hollywood down from 5 majors to 4. All kinds of regulatory hurdles there. But it doesn't seem, everything I've come to understand is that the Sony deal is not popular within Paramount's walls because they don't want to go private. They don't like private equity. Now it's starting to look like Paramount just might go it alone. Like they might just not take any of these offers. They recently fired CEO Bob Bakish, and now there's like this trio of people heading up other divisions that are sort of CEOing the company, and it seems a little messy. But yeah, it doesn't look like the Sony offer is going to go. And even if even if they agreed to a deal in principle, getting through regulatory hurdles would seem, to my view, almost impossible.
I think so too.
So I don't know. But when you and I talked about this a little bit last week, we're like, on the one hand, like I think Paramount staying alone is better, but I also am concerned about their ability to survive. So I don't know. But yeah, that's
the question. Is like the studio clearly has not been doing great for a while. I mean, there's been
arguably 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they've had a rough stretch, to put it mildly. But yeah, there's just been all this turmoil behind the scenes, and I think like literally books have been written about the business problems and conflicts and things like that behind the scenes with the Redstone family and the ownership of the company and all that kind of stuff. So like, you know, this has been like a long time coming, and people have just assumed that, oh yeah, Paramount's going to get sort of subsumed by some other company or something. But I don't know enough about this, Ryan, but I feel like, yeah, like you mentioned, maybe it is a good thing for them to kind of go it alone, and maybe just like now that they have this sort of 3-headed monster of 3 different people running the company as like a joint CEO. I think they refer to it as like the office of the CEO position.
Yeah, that's what they're calling it. Yeah.
So maybe those guys who run different divisions, there's like Paramount Pictures, and then there's Showtime / MTV Entertainment Studios and CBS. Maybe like those guys putting their heads together can come up with some ways to, I don't know what they would need to do, cut costs. That would certainly happen if there was actually a merger at play. Like tons and tons of people would lose their jobs.
Yeah. Well, they also need cash is the bigger problem. And part of the problem with Bob Bakish getting fired is he didn't pull the trigger on, he could have sold Showtime. He could have sold BET for like billions of dollars and didn't pull the trigger. And those assets literally decline in value every single day. So there's some stuff going on.
So now they're in a tough position of like, do you try to sell this stuff for basically pennies and like just to get something, or do you try to, I don't know, reorganize the company in such a way and sort of re-strategize in a way? Like, do you think that they should, here's an idea, Ryan, and again, I know nothing about like the inner workings of these companies or whether or not this is even a feasible thing. Do you think they should just like shut the doors on Paramount Plus, for example, right now?
I've said this for months.
Okay, well, we've also said that like the future is streaming, and there's no way around that. So for Paramount to remain a viable entity, how could they close their streaming service but also remain, you know, a major player in Hollywood? I don't understand.
You go the Sony route, and you become an arms dealer. You know, like you know, other people need content. Like Sony has a pretty lucrative deal with Netflix for output. You know, all of their theatrical movies go to Netflix after their VOD window.
Okay.
So, you know, I think now the problem is Paramount should have gotten in that arms dealing race a long time ago. I mean, like not everyone can be an arms dealer. That's starting to be more attractive as streaming seems. Because my other problem is I don't think Peacock's going to make it either. And I don't know that like the industry, I don't know. I don't know where this all goes. Like it gets tricky, but Paramount. I mean, I think the thing is like Paramount or NBC Universal should have pulled the plug on Peacock and or Paramount Plus a while ago. It's beginning to feel sunk cost fallacy here a bit, but because they're losing billions getting those businesses up and running. So I don't know. Again, I'm with you. I don't know the inner workings, but I've felt for a while that one of those services needs to die. So we'll see.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll keep people posted on what happens to Paramount because it is an important thing. I mean, as we've been talking about over the past few years, like consolidation in the industry seems inevitable to some degree, but like every time a studio gets gobbled up, that's one fewer place for storytellers to
It's a
go and
fewer
sell their.
it's one less buyer in the marketplace, which is bad.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so moving on to Netflix's Cobra Kai is going to be concluding with a 3-part final season. So part 1 is going to be coming to Netflix on July 18th. Part 2 is going to be split up and arriving on November 28th. And then part 3 is coming in 2025. I think they've recently announced that Sony's new Karate Kid movie, which stars Jackie Chan and Ralph Macchio, is going to be coming to theaters in May of 2025. So I think that's going to be sort of timed to the release of this final season here. I just wanted to mention that because I know that a lot of people like this show. I have not seen any of it myself. Do you count yourself among the Cobra Kai faithful, Ryan?
I do not.
Okay.
And I will only say that my girlfriend got really into the show for a bit, and the bits that I caught, I just remember thinking to myself, "This is the show people are obsessed with."
Oh no.
But yeah, it struck me as odd. But again, watching stuff out of context, so I'm not like holding that against the show by any means.
Yeah.
But yes.
Okay. Well, yeah. Go to the article to get those dates again and learn more about that. I just wanted to mention it here on the show. And then Vin Diesel is coming back to the Riddick franchise. I saw Pitch Black years and years and years ago, Ryan, and don't really remember much about it. I remember it being sort of like maybe more of like a down and dirty kind of thing compared to like the I don't know, the slickness of like the Fast and Furious movies, for example.
Oh yeah.
But I have not seen the Chronicles of Riddick or whatever the third film in this franchise was called. That's name is escaping me right now. Was it
Just called Riddick? Yeah, just called Riddick.
So now he's coming back for a movie called Riddick: Furia. I think
it's Furia is how you say
Furia, Furya.
Yeah.
And David Twohy is the writer and director. Once again, he's, I believe, written and directed every movie in this franchise. So, what are your feelings about the Pitch Black universe? I guess this franchise, and what do you think about a fourth film?
I quite like Pitch Black and Riddick. I haven't seen Chronicles of Riddick in a very long time, but that was an example of like a weird $120 million movie that should have never existed. It like flopped very badly. But famously, Vin Diesel, to come back to Fast and Furious for that cameo in Tokyo Drift, negotiated to get the rights to this franchise so he could make 2013's Riddick. Like it's been a huge passion project for him for years. So, it was before the pandemic, they got the script done for this. And then the pandemic happened. So I think that slowed things down. Like this would have been here a couple of years ago, I think. But yeah, so I mean, the last one was very successful for a mid-budget movie, and at a time where we could use stuff like that, I'm all for this happening. I did mention in my write-up that Vin Diesel was accused of sexual battery last year. We haven't quite resolved that yet, but the fact that this movie is moving forward is a bit interesting. Diesel has denied those allegations, but it is sort of, I don't want to sweep that under the rug as we're talking about these movies.
Yeah, for sure.
But
that's like a cloud that's hovering over this movie for sure.
It seems to be, yeah. But again, you mentioned yesterday, I don't know, like if the studio conducted some independent investigation and determined, I have no idea, but it is something. But yeah, just taking the movie as a movie, I'd be curious to see where this goes.
Okay. And then last story that I wanted to mention here, our headline says Hollywood's weirdest horror director is making an 80s vampire movie. I'm very excited about this. So the name of the film, I believe, is, what is it called? It's called Flesh of the Gods. And it is the script is from Andrew Kevin Walker, who wrote Seven and The Killer, the David Fincher movies. And Panos Cosmatos is the director of this. He directed Mandy, the Nicolas Cage film that came out in 2018. And all right, listen to this, Ryan. So, in glittering 80s LA, married couple Raoul, played by Oscar Isaac, and Alex, played by Kristen Stewart, descend each evening from their luxury skyscraper condo and head into an electric nighttime realm of 80s Los Angeles. When they cross paths with the mysterious and enigmatic Nameless and her hard partying cabal, Raoul and Alex are seduced into a glamorous, surrealistic world of hedonism, thrills, and violence. And yeah, this is a vampire movie set in 80s Los Angeles. Paris Cosmatos referred to this as a hot rod joyride deep into the glittering heart of hell. So Oscar Isaac, Kristen Stewart, 80s, Panos Cosmatos, LA, like hell yes, I'm totally in on this. What do you think about this?
Look, this is going to be Film Twitter's favorite movie whenever it comes about, but not to be this guy again, but going back to the beginning of our conversation, like what works in Hollywood? Well, one thing I've talked about recently is vampires are not working at all. Like the last like 3 vampire movies that have come out have, bombed or underperformed, and it's been a long time since we've had a breakout vampire movie. So unless this is made for very, very cheap, and given the people who are involved, I don't know that it can be that cheap. Like I'm personally excited for it, but I'd be curious to see how this sort of shakes out, like on a longer timeline.
Yeah.
But like, look, the guy who made Mandy making a vampire movie with these people, hell yeah. Like I'm with you, like absolutely. Like to throw some optimism in the gears, absolutely. But it also is just like I'm so nervous about everything now, like just nothing working, that like I get like pre-nervous about stuff now where I'm like, oh god, is this gonna like not work? But yeah, I just really it's like, thank you the industry as it currently exists for destroying my optimism, but as a movie I'm very excited. So yeah, I'm with
Yeah,
you.
I have to assume that this is going to be made for under $50 million or something like that. So like whether or not that can reclaim its budget and all that stuff, let's punt that part of the discussion down the road to when this gets
100%. Yeah, yeah.
actually released. And then for right now, Ryan, especially given what we've talked about over the course of this episode, let's just sort of luxuriate in the glory of this announcement and just like spend the next year or two hoping that this ends up being if not like a full-blown hit, then certainly like a cult classic or something that
Yeah,
ends
but
up
I
being
think that the again, I do think like this has every piece on the board for people to just like yell about this movie. Like the people that love this movie are gonna like they're gonna make it their whole personality. Like
yeah.
I think that's cool. So I'm really, really, really looking forward to this.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's going to do it for today's show. You can find much more about all of these stories that we mentioned on the show at slashfilm.com. I will link to all of them in the show notes as well. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on Apple, Overcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, and mailbag topics to us at bpearson@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget to take a minute to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That really does help us out a lot. Tell your friends about the show any way you can. Thank you